First of all, it's great to talk about my work in context and to see multiple pieces in the body of work together, because I think a lot of my pieces inform each other and can understand my journey and my process better by saying a lot. So this is great. Hopefully people feel free to walk around the galleries while I start to introduce my background. I've been an artist kind of my whole life. I went to school for painting. I grew up thinking I would be a painter and studied painting, and worked as a fine art painter, trying to, in my early 20s, pursued painting as a career and had other side jobs. And really through the development of my work, I realized that I just love painting, the act of it. And I have a hard time kind of finishing images. And when I finally got out of school and a chance to make the work that I wanted to make and kind of see what happened with it, just being, completely pure and free, I did realize wow, I really like the way images evolve over time, this kind of frame by frame process. And that is the title of the gallery, Frame by Frame. So that's a concept we can kind of come back to today a bunch of times, but that I really like kind of sequence of the way the image evolves over time and changes. And that's the way I kind of think artistically. And I've always drawn and painted these really dense layered images and reworked them. And yeah, I just got to a point where I was like, I'm an animator. I'm making moving image work. And for me, that was like my big breakthrough, honestly, in my artistic career, kind of accepting the fact that I'm not a traditional painter. And it freed me to explore kind of like where we are today, these digital mediums and what you can do with screens and technology and getting my paintings and drawings out into the world. So yeah, I started to record my paintings and drawings as I rework them and start to do these short experimental films. Again, I don't know, the work in the gallery, I see them as almost moving paintings. So they're films, but they're not really like movies the way we traditionally think about it. And I've always seen them as art objects more than like something, I have done work for television and had work in years, but I see them more as like permanent installations or art objects. So like paintings that move. Yeah, I started to develop this process, and pretty early on, I got really cool feedback about it. It is cool, right? And for me, it was like, this is what I've always been doing, reworking my stuff, but people have only seen, the final paintings in galleries. But when I started to make my work about the way the image evolves and changes, it clicked really immediately. And for me, it was like an aha moment of doing what I've always already done, but thinking about it in a different way. And this was right around the time when streaming video online really became possible, like video, and when social media networks kind of started taking off, and Reddit and things like that. So yeah, naturally I put these films on YouTube and Vimeo, and they just kind of went viral and kind of still are. So I always see my work as, even though they're traditional paintings, they are internet native. They've always lived online, and that's largely where they've been seen and found and discovered. And again, very cool to see it in a format like the gallery we have here today, because this is sort of the bridge between my traditional art life and gallery shows and museum shows, and my work being really internet native and based, and where it's been seen. And so this is sort of the best of both worlds here. So I'll make this long story short, because we're going to talk about specific pieces, but I've basically kind of been unspooling that thread ever since. It's almost 20 years now of exploring this method of frame by frame animation. And someone's saying, yeah, you can mute the sound in the gallery or not, it's up to you. Hopefully you can hear me speak. I don't have my work is very stream of consciousness, and like we said, frame by frame. So I'm literally working on these pieces one day at a time, one image at a time. And that's just been the story for 20 years now, where I let the work guide me where it wants to go, and each piece kind of evolves from the last one. And in a big way, kind of walking through this gallery, it's all one piece of the same thing. This is my artistic exploration over the past 2 decades. Not everything I've made is in this gallery, but a lot of my major pieces are, and most of the pieces that have been minted are in this gallery. Thank you to AOTM, by the way. I want to call you guys out for putting this gallery together and everything they do to provide context for artists. So I'll just shout out now, if you have time during or after this interview, to go check out the AOTM site. It's just a huge, amazing resource. And they also have interviews and articles, essays about me as well there. But yeah, so I've kind of just been making this work, and mostly what I've been doing in those past kind of 20 years is these 1-minute pieces where I rework the same piece of paper, frame by frame, to create a 1-minute piece. So my pieces are almost everything you're seeing in a gallery. If you're walking around, I should sort of walk around while I'm talking. Everything you're seeing in the galleries are all made one frame at a time, and the ones that are kind of horizontal or in landscape orientation, not square or portrait, are they typically take up to a year. and they're 1,440 frames each. So 24 frames per second, over 60 seconds. And we can talk about, I mean, I could keep going forever, but I landed on the 1 minute format a while ago. Again, because my work is sort of internet native, and it's not a film, but it's also not like a short GIF or loop. I want it to be in the sort of in-between zone. And 1 minute always became sort of like this perfect, simple kind of way to structure what I'm doing. So by the time I finish these films, the piece of paper, the surface that I'm working on is like very textured and basically worn to pieces. There's like sort of this natural state of like, I can't rework anymore. It's exactly 1 minute. I don't think this is true anymore, but back in the day, like 1 minute was a limit for length on like social media for a video and stuff like that. And so my work has always been like 1 minute in a gallery is kind of a long time. And so you guys, actually, as you're walking around this virtual gallery, if you stand in front of the piece for the full minute, that's the way it's intended to be seen. Hopefully it's like, it has impact and it feels sort of like longer than it really is. Or it's like, this is substantial. But it's also not a movie, right? So if you see my work in theaters, and it's screened a lot in film festivals and stuff, 1 minute is like extremely fast. And so my films go by really quickly whenever they're in festivals or screened on television or something like that. So, but yeah, I'm really interested in time. And then I'll say one more thing and then I'll stop for another question. But like you'll see, there's also pieces that are square or in different orientations, and those really are shorter loops. And yeah, I wanted to explore obviously different aspect ratios and timing, and I can talk about why as we get more into the specific pieces. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's very cool. AOTM, the way they put this gallery together, when you land in the gallery, you're kind of like you're right in front of Paper Trail. It's a very cool, impactful moment. Yeah, so this piece is different from my other work in that it uses collage a lot more. And I love exploring. I explored collage in my work previously. In other people, the timeline's going to get all mixed up, and I made these, all these pieces again over the past like 15 years. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I kind of like ordered the way. We'll just slowly walk through each piece and talk about them a little bit. So
all right, yeah. All right, cool. So I'll just talk about this piece. I really wanted to use collage. I think it's a really interesting method when you talk about my process of frame by frame. So if you watch the piece, I layer collage on, I'm painting with whiteout and ink, and then every 10 seconds in the film, you're going to see like everything's kind of ripped away. So hopefully you can kind of see that there's things being collaged. The collage elements are moving around, being drawn on, then ripped away, then reorganized. So that's the way I approach this piece. And again, I kind of figure out what I'm doing as I'm making it. But I started with this collage elements, which come from, like all these different cultures and time periods. Really trying to be like, I worked in an art museum for a decade while I was working as an artist. And so like, I've just been really informed by all these different cultural symbols and styles all mixed together. And I really wanted to jumble them up in my work. It feels like a form of, all of these pieces are kind of a self-portrait, right, for me. And they literally sort of like reflect my day-to-day artistic thinking. But I was like, I just want to bring all this jumble of like all the history and all the influences onto the page and sort of make sense of it. So yeah, it starts with collage, kind of creating a landscape, and then I build it up with more objects and artifacts. And then I rip it apart and I take all the elements off, and then I put them on in different orientations. And so to me, it sort of has this, I never want to say what my work's about. I really don't know, but hopefully, like you're saying, it's like going through history, going through time, seeing like societies rise and fall. And I think in a lot of ways, a lot of my work is about just trying to figure out who I am and what the hell's going on. And sort of this existential sort of crisis sort of feeling. And yeah, I'm watching the film now. Later in the film, I bring in more like everyday objects and personal iconography. But yeah, like all my work, I really wanted to almost feel like information overload, sort of just like racing thoughts, all this stuff going on. For me, this is a reflection of like what it feels like to be human or alive. And also, again, talking about internet culture and data and stuff like.
Go
ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, this feels like such a great way to start, because watching this, of course, is always like a historical influx, but this feels like sort of a representation of like what it is like to like be on the internet. All of our different feeds, all of our different things and platforms we're accessing, we have this constant sort of like all of these different influences and images and like visual vocabularies that are always side by side or on top of each other and layered. And it just feels so poignant for, as you said, this is kind of like what it means to be alive today. And it's, on the one hand, it's like this amazing abundance, right? Which is absolutely incredible. We have access to so many things. And then there's also this total like overwhelming aspect to it, which is, almost pleasurable in a strange way. So I think this is a really, really beautiful way to start.
I love that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want it to feel like there's a magnitude. It's awe-inspiring and amazing, and also frightening and overwhelming, and that push and pull between.
Yeah, there's like an element of the sublime in it. You know, it's like
Yes.
frightening and overwhelming, and you just kind of almost surrender to it in this way. That's also very human.
Yes, and also hopefully like it's still. I've always wanted to retain like it's just made by hand, so it's just a drawing with like collage bits, so that there's something really accessible and kind of like just mundane about the materials, matched with this sort of like this consciousness and power. Yeah, totally. So all these pieces have sound, and I do the sound design for all my work. I've always been like an artist musician, but I professionally sort of pursued visual art my whole life, and it's been my passion. But when I started making these moving image pieces, it was pretty obvious, like I need to score them. And I've always been like, my approach to art making has always been really personal. And that's just the way I approach art making, right? There's a lot of, as an animator and a professor of animation, like so much of this art form is collaborative. But for me, like, I just have to make the sound myself. Because it's like, I need to figure it out myself. And so what I do is I work on these pieces for like a year. Then I do the sound afterwards. And for me, the sound does a lot of work to kind of tie it all together and help me make sense of it. And I love to create the sound design that goes with it. And I've got a lot of great feedback about my sound design work, which I'm really proud of. But hopefully it has similar vibes in a way to the visuals. So the way I approach sound design is I really actually try to, I watch these things over and over again. As you can imagine, I'm making these one frame at a time over such a long period of time that I start to sort of hear them in my head as I'm making it. And by the time it's done, a lot of the job for me is just to translate what's in my head to like actual sounds and sound design. And like the films themselves, I really like to use like a lot of layering and sort of with the sound design, feel like the longer you listen to it, the longer you engage with it, the more you're going to see. So I hope people are vibing like in the gallery right now. It's like the longer you're with one of these pieces and you watch them on loop, same with the sound, that it sort of reveals itself and doesn't get boring, which is always an issue with any artwork, but especially artwork that sort of loops. You want it to kind of continuously be engaging. So I layer a lot of sound effects and sound designs and record most of the sounds myself. And most of like, I wouldn't call it, I'm always torn between calling it music at all. To me, it's very tonal, and I'm using a lot of like long tones and complex like layering of tones. To me, it's like it's not quite music in the way that these are not quite films. I'm trying to create sort of like the atmosphere of the space. But yeah, if you listen to this piece, like, I'm not gonna turn it on right now, but to me, it has like a bit of jungle vibes, a bit of like early human ancestors through like modern era, sort of like, I'm trying to bring that all together. But also, if you guys listen closely, I have a lot of like heavy breathing and human body sounds in my pieces. A lot of my pieces are figurative and involve like a figure, and like I said, they're kind of self-portraits. I've always seen, this might sound kind of weird, but I've always seen these films as sort of like inside my mind, or hallucinate, like a visual, like I'm in a closed off space, and this is like a visual being fed into my body, and I'm like having this like one-to-one relationship with sound and image. And so I like to, for whatever reason, like it feels like I'm almost like scoring a person watching the film in the film. Sort of like heartbeats, a lot of racing heartbeats, lots of heavy breathing, lots of like hands drawing and paper crumbling and pens on paper. So sort of recreating maybe the sounds of what it was like to make the piece in the piece itself. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, they're almost like the pieces are being made in front of you as you're watching them. It's like it's the process of creation. So I'm also like that play of like, they look like they took a long time to make, but they're really fast and almost feel like they're happening kind of creation in real time also. So that kind of push and pull.
Yeah, there's something very visceral about that, and I think the whole project is very visceral. I mean, it is this kind of sensory overload, but it is this, you have this hand quality, right? And then the sound as well is this like this immediacy of your engagement with the work, but also I guess with the viewer's engagement with the work. You're kind of rewarding people who immerse themselves in it and have a more, I guess, intimate relationship with something that's also very overwhelming. So that's an interesting dissonance.
Yes, that was a great moment. I see Casey from AOTM is here also. Casey at the time was at Super Rare and really helped with that sale and that show that was up during Art Basel in Miami. And yeah, so to Art on Internet, who also bought my Genesis on Super Rare, and we can talk about Art on Internet a little bit more later, but just an example of a collector who's been super supportive. And yeah, getting that kind of support obviously is really meaningful. This is a longer conversation, but like, yeah, before I got into this space, I've been a professor and a museum educator, and done commissions and won awards and grants, but never saw this kind of income from my work ever in my life. And I feel like it's worth, I mean, I know, I feel like it's worth it. And like, I've done well, like professionally before the space, but yeah, it's such a gift as an artist to like have the collector see the value of what you're making and do that, and continue to support me. But I will say, like, I kind of feel really lucky that I got to basically work as an artist and make work for free for myself. That's this piece. Let's just talk about this. This piece, I just made this piece because I'm an artist. I didn't have like a show lined up. I didn't have like any really intentions to sell it like right away when it was finished. And everything you're seeing in these galleries is made that way. I can't control how long this stuff takes to make. I don't know where it's going. So this is like my life's mission, is just to make this kind of work, and then everything else kind of comes through that. So this might sound unbelievable to people in this space, or like, but like, I made this work for free and just put it online. Like, that's been my career my whole life. Through that, I became a professor and got, all these gigs and got shows because people discovered my work. But I've never really made money directly off of my work. It's all been just because I have to make it, and because I want, yeah. And like, eventually, and this is what I've always said, eventually I know this stuff is really valuable. I've had chances to sell work like Paper Trail in a more traditional, pre-Web3 setting. And it's always been kind of like not an ideal situation. And like we all know, like there's a lot of problems that NFTs and blockchain solve for digital artists like myself. So yeah, super exciting sale. And I haven't released a lot of one-of-ones because they're all like this. They're like big monumental pieces that, yeah, hopefully continue to sell for, high prices and keep going up. I will say that, like, I think my work's still undervalued, quite frankly. And every artist feels this way in the space. You see what things go for and what's hyped up and what's popular. But I will say this generally, like, I get such great feedback from my collectors in the space, and just generally from like audiences online, that it helps stay confident, because yeah, it's hard to be confident as an artist all the time. You're always doubting yourself, and never think you're good enough. And the only judge of whether I'm good enough is me. But yeah, getting positive feedback has always been really, really helpful. And then getting financial responses is really gives me the confidence, obviously, to keep going. It's great.
Well, one thing that I think is really special, I mean, I come from the traditional art world as well. And, I think there are parts of the traditional art world that certainly require improvement that I think Web3 and blockchain can solve. But I think it is really beautiful to be able to see works like this in this oncyber gallery. I think this is such a gorgeous way to see digitally native work and to be able to sort of commune with other people seeing it. So shout out to oncyber for providing these. And I know at AOTM, we absolutely love these galleries. Shout out to Pablo, who's here in the audience, and also Casey from AOTM. We love putting these together. I think it's a really beautiful way to contextualize work and to offer sort of a new way for people to see and enjoy and sort of consume digital artwork. So,
but I really love remixing my own work. So based off what I've just been saying before, like, I spent a really long time on these pieces. They're really complicated, and they're internet native. So like, I realized a long time ago, it's like, you can just post the film once and then just move on with your life or whatever. But really, the job of an artist and being online is like informing people about the work, having it be consumed, and making it available and accessible. So I've always like cut my film down into smaller pieces, posted still frames, done exhibitions in real life and online in different places. And I've always found ways to sort of like remix the work too, but I've never been so kind of straightforward about it from the beginning of a piece as I was with North Star. So I actually made North Star last year. Again, talking about like the history of all this work that was made. It's one of the more recent pieces that I made. I made it in the spring of last year, and it's one of my 5-second loops. So my 5-second loops tend to be my additions that I do. And after I finished it, I knew I was going to kind of cut it up and remix it into different pieces. And I started posting those on Twitter every day and messing around and putting them in grids and playing with the timing. So one cool thing about my work too is just like when I can display the same animation multiple times in one video, you can sort of see some of the underlying timing and kind of manipulation that I'm doing. And with art, it's really cool. So, and just playing around with color, I did a derivative of a previous piece, Goodnight Moon, and made it blue, like T. Joe's blue, and got to kind of putting color in my loops. I was very interested in being in this space and seeing what an NFT is essentially, like, and how it can be something that you can't do in, again, traditional spaces, right? You can't sell a work of art that has 27 currently different options for the collector to choose between. So I am going to keep adding more as I go. Forever, I can do that ad for forever, and I plan to kind of keep adding for a long time. But yeah, when I heard about what Transient was doing, I don't want to talk too long about. There's so many stories in this space and to go down. But Transient's awesome, and I know a lot of people here are familiar with them. And I've clearly been following what they've been doing with contracts over the past year. I was in their Outlier kind of program in the spring of last year while I was making this piece. It's kind of in the back of my mind, like, wow, my next edition could be. It could be like you buy the artwork and you get all the variations of it. It's a pretty obvious concept, right? It makes a lot of sense. And it's like you could do this really for all of my work in a lot of ways, just for the practical sense of like, here it is in super 4K, and here it is where it can actually like play on OpenSea, and here it is as a smidge, and let the collector just like have all that resources within the NFT. But so I also, again, I think it's cool to be in this space. I feel like we're all still really early, where this is where the future's heading, and like just what AO, you guys are saying, like we're going to see a lot more galleries like this and artists displaying their work this way over the next 10, 15 years and into the future. But it's like a chance to play around with contracts in a really innovative way. I have an idea, and it's an addition I'm proud of that fits in with my body of work, but is like a new way to explore the medium. And that's why I did it. And then, yeah, bigger story, which we can get into, is right now I have a 2-month-old baby. So this whole past year has been like a race against time to get stuff done, because I could talk about it, right? Like, actually, the loop that's right next to North Star is Baby Eyes, and was inspired by my first daughter when she was born, and just having kids and my life, and as it evolves, like what's going on with my family influences my work and my timeline and my schedule and the themes that I'm exploring. So I consciously wanted to get North Star out before the end of the year, and I actually, so there's a few other pieces that are not in this gallery. So some pieces that I did for Noble Gallery, a Max Payne, and we'll talk about it later, but a print for Avant Art. I just wanted to get all that stuff done by the end of last year. So North Star is one of the most recent pieces that I finished. And if people can go, links on my profile and on X, and if you go to the landing page for North Star, you can go through all the variations. So in a lot of ways, I feel like the artwork is just actually, I should do a North Star gallery on Cyber, quite frankly. Well, that's something I'm going to do. But I feel like seeing all the variations of the piece itself is sort of like what the piece is about. It's more than just the one animation. Yeah, it was, again, another really great kind of like connections and story in the space that all came together perfectly. First of all, I'll say, like, this is one of my most popular pieces. And I know why. And like, again, talking about it, like, it's very colorful and bright, and childlike. And yeah, it's just a special piece. And like I was saying before, it was inspired by my first daughter that was born. And I've talked about this before, but like, it's called Baby Eyes. It's like seeing the world's fresh eyes. And right now I have a really young new baby at home, and I'm really fascinated by human consciousness and like what vision is. And so just looking at this piece and some other pieces in the Gallery of the Square, I'm really trying to explore this like very chunky block kind of style drawing, really highly symbolic shapes. And it's inspired by like cards for babies to look at, and child like toys, and the simplicity of like kind of, infant or preschool sort of like aesthetic. It's also about, like growing up really quickly and sort of evolution of the human being and the body. And I'll say, like, all these pieces are self-portraits, but in a lot of ways, like, it's one of these pieces that's like not about me personally, but kind of like, for me, it's like me observing someone else, and it has a different sort of viewpoint for me. It feels special in that way. This is my only one of one that is like square format and is a short loop, but I think it's a really special piece and kind of deserves to be a one-on-one, and it was perfect for this occasion. If you don't know, MAPS does psychedelic research, like you were saying, so it's a great cause. Christie's is obviously like a really great auction house, and there's a lot of debate back and forth in this space, again, about like the value of the traditional auction houses. But as an artist, I think we still see their value, and just the recent auctions that have been going on, are some of the best stuff that's happening in this space, I think, art-wise. So I'm proud to sort of like, again, be part of the first wave to explore that relationship.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I just want to say what I love about this. So you're saying it's kind of inspired about this new child, this new life you have. This is also what we've seen so far, one of the most colorful pieces. So this idea of fresh eyes and new colors, I think is very beautiful. And then I think also, you mentioned this sort of blockiness and sort of basic shapes, which alludes to what a child kind of looks at. But I also think about kind of the beginning of civilization in general, right? And just the beginning of visual vocabularies in general. There's a lot of like, almost in my mind, like mark making here, which I think is beautiful when considered in conjunction with this idea of kind of a new life.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, totally. Like, it's my own language or kind of like early symbolic system. And I want all my work to feel like timeless. If you see all my, like, I think everything's political and topical and you can't help it. But like in a lot of ways, I am really trying to borrow from this, like, timeless, monumental imagery that's like pre-language or like pre-written like word. And like we were talking about before, like it is joyous, almost an overwhelming like joy quality, but also like anxious, anxiety inducing. And that is the experience for me of like, again, my human experience and also of parenthood. And I'll just point, I don't know, it's cool to see everyone sitting in front of it and taking it in. But there's just a lot of personal like kind of imagery. There's like me and my wife in bed. There's like my dog like actually taking a shit and like on the carpet and stuff. And lots of symbols. Like this is actually, again, a lot of the recent work is like COVID related or whatever. There's like bottles of hand sanitizer in there. And then, yeah, for me, like kind of ladders to the stars or the heavens, rainbows, these sort of like uplifting images, and then kind of danger signs, like warning signs, like light, wall plugs, skulls, like sort of this like life is this like journey and there's good and evil. And like, yeah, there's something very kind of primitive about this and elemental. And I did actually print out stills of these and like give them to my daughter to play with and stuff like that. So yeah, these are really special. We'll see how my work evolves as like my life changes and my relationships and things grow.
Yeah,
I really love the auction was great, and it was collected by One of One, Ryan Zur, and it's like an amazing collection. And I'm really proud to be a part of that collection. And I'm, like we were saying, I've been very blessed with like good sales, and so it feels great to do gifts back. And obviously, I feel like this piece is like perfect for psychedelic research, and I'm happy that it's tied with that cause, like sort of historically. And again, another longer conversation, but I think the parallels between what my art's about, sort of like the psychedelic experience and that community becoming more mainstream, and the blockchain and this kind of crypto space, they all feel really interconnected or interwoven in a lot of ways.
Mycelium networks.
Yeah. There's something going on, and it all feels like it is part of the next sort of wave. And I really felt this like 20 years ago, like thinking back to like the year 2000, it was like this century is going to be about like spiritual awakening through like technology. And like we're going to go back to sort of like, there's some like going back to like our humanity through like the evolution of this technology. It's going to free us to be like more human. And I've always sort of felt that, and I feel that in the space, and I feel like my work's part of that larger human journey that we're all on together. And like as an artist, I can't help but be a part of, or a reflection of like the human experience and how we're evolving. And yeah, I mean, everyone in this space kind of recognizes it. This feels like a point of where we're like, we really are evolving as a people and as a society and a culture rapidly, and we're like kind of on the cutting edge of it. And it's so the psychedelic research at a historic auction house selling to like one of these great crypto art collections. Yeah, it was just perfect. Yeah, so many things to say. First of all, you can see Goodnight Moon in the other gallery. Talking about why baby, that's also a cool thing about Baby Eyes, was it was the first time, this was 2 years ago, right in the summer. But it was like the first time I ever had a chance to mint on my own contract. My first 4 one of ones were on super rare. And yeah, for the auction, they're like, do it on your own contract. So that's why it's like I had a reason to start minting on my own contract. And that's just also been kind of a cool exploration in the space. Let's go into it. Goodnight Moon, the original version, which is in black and white in another gallery around the corner, was my first edition ever in the space. So talking about minting on your own contract, which was minted on OpenSea, right, in the summer of 2021, my first collection that I ever minted. And Goodnight Moon is also, like we were just talking about, influenced by my first daughter's birth. I think, I'll just say, like I was talking about with Paper Trail, I really see the value in remixing as an artist and taking and stealing from my favorite works and pieces. And again, working in a museum for so long, like I can't help but like lift ideas and take things that I like and remix them. I think Goodnight Moon is like one of the greatest works of art of the 20th century. I think it's just like perfect in every single way. And it's in like all the imperfections of it make it just like there's something about it that is just beautiful. The poetry of it, the mouth sounds of it, and then obviously the illustrations. And for me, it really matches like the vibes I dig, where it's like it feels mundane, but it's also like super elevated. It feels like a prayer, or it's spiritual. And I just read it a bunch of times to my daughter, and it kept always being like, God damn it, this is so good. Because I think of myself, I'm a collector, a curator, whatever. Like I'm always thinking about like, what do I think is like just like the highest level of like, stuff that's been made. And a lot of times it is that short form stuff, like a children's book or a pop song, like they just break through and are just like inherently perfect. So if you see the piece, it's sort of like a remix of like Goodnight Moon. So again, bringing in sort of like childhood innocence and childlike imagery, but with some of my like, again, more like personal kind of experiences and expression. Again, a really popular piece, and this was again a big kind of breakthrough for me in the space of thinking as an artist. When TJO, who I love and I'm friends with, and I think he's a genius, did the blue, which most people are familiar with, it was an obvious like thing, like, oh, I'm gonna mix it up with blue. And when I did it immediately, like on my own, I looked at it, I was like, this really vibes, because a lot of my work is in black and white for a lot of reasons I can go into, but like I really like the minimal kind of binary take of just working with pen and ink and white out. And for me, like talking about my work is sort of like a language of its own. Like I really like thinking about it as like black or white, and I enjoy working with black and white primarily. But this deep blue color, it's like draws you in. It connotates like obviously like comfort and rest, but like also like a deep sadness or longing, and just like juxtaposed with the animation, it really clicks. And I posted it on Twitter, and like I told TJ that like I don't want to mint this, or like I'm just doing this for fun, whatever. But it like blew up. It's like extremely popular, and like with people outside of the space who have no idea what the Blue Project is, or CCO, or what's going on with that stuff. My first inclination was like, Goodnight Moon's already been minted. It's a piece that exists. This is just a thing for fun, a variation. And talking about North Star is sort of me like seeing how this happened and thinking more again about how I can make one edition where all the variations of it live within one NFT. But it was just so perfect. And like I said, originally, my first two editions of 30 were minted in the summer of 2021. I hadn't released any other editions after that. And so there was 60 early editions. Blue Moon was the first edition on my own contract. So I finally got like an editions contract. And I airdropped it to all the owners of Goodnight Moon and Still Life with Lemon for free. So partially because it's like they bought my work first, and I want to support them and give them something cool back. Not something like I'm inclined to do a lot as an artist, but like it really felt it'd been like a year and a half or 2 years since my first mint, and it was like, this is a special piece. I'm airdropping it to most people, and then because there were multiple holders of both pieces that got the airdrop, there were like 10 or 11 left that I sold directly to some great collectors. And it sort of has a life of its own. It's very popular, and I think it's kind of cool that it's Blue Moon. It's a derivative or a variation or a remix collaboration of Goodnight Moon, but it really is its own vibe and its own piece. And again, like I've seen collectors, like you can imagine this on a nice square monitor, like displayed in a children's room. Like it's got, I don't know, to me it's like it's got I think of it almost as a sound machine or a nightlight, conceptually, like the vibe of it. So
I love that. Beautiful to think about as a nightlight. But I'm also just going to the use of, of course, there's the direct relation of the TJO, and but I also think of Eve Klein and like those extremely immersive works that are all about just the experience, the visceral experience of kind of diving into a blue and being completely overwhelmed by it. And I think that's a relationship that I make when I look at this work as well.
Yeah, totally. And this is me as an artist, seeing what resonates with people. Because to be honest, again, like I'm so interested in the the line work and the imagery and like sort of the frame by frame animation that sometimes I forget about color completely. And I actually am colorblind. So I have inclinations to like kind of not work with color a lot, but when I do, I see a really strong response. And same thing with the gold pieces for North Star that I've done. There's something about gold and orange and the heat. The color just sort of breaks through with the images. So this is a job for me going forward as an artist, always to like not overlook color. But I have a really complex relationship with color, and I go back and forth with it a lot. I use celestial imagery, like stars and moons, and I give them sort of like human qualities. And for me, like this moon is like, it's like God or like the spirit. And hopefully I'm like taking Goodnight Moon and almost taking it into another elevated plane, but also hopefully like slightly like just deranged or kind of like there's hopefully something a little bit like off about it, and just mysterious. And that, again, like with my work, I work on it frame by frame, kind of see where it leads. But I always wanted to have this sort of like inherent mystery or rhythm to it, where it never really makes sense completely.
I think the moon in general, just for civilization, is one of the inherent mysteries of the world, right? I mean, civilizations are mesmerized by the moon, and we spend our whole lives with this body in the sky that's just this kind of beacon of life. And so I think using that in this digitally native work is really interesting as well. This thing that's so inherent to kind of our beings in the quote unquote real world, and then putting it into this other new real world, I think is really beautiful as well.
Such a great comment. 100%. Yeah. And moon is tied to rhythms and tides and patterns. And it's sort of this beacon at night. And there's a lot of poetry in it just as a concept and idea. I'm really, really fascinated with symbolism. And again, as an artist, like I'm just thinking like intellectually, it's like so much great art deals with these symbols, and it brings things out of people and makes us think about these higher powers and like the bigger, how insignificant we are, our relationship with the heavens. And it's like, as an artist, it is my duty to sort of like explore those themes and bring it into my work, but also make it personal and make it, contemporary. So I'm like a broken record now. This is called New Life. You can see a theme I'm really interested in, also inspired by my daughter. But again, thinking of it more as going back to what I just said about the moon, like as people, like what are the most important things are like life and death, right? Like the birth and the afterlife. And so much art is just about that. I think so much of what we're going through as people is just about that. So this piece, again, is sort of really directly in my mind, thinking about sort of new life, a rebirth. Again, not to get like religious or whatever, but a lot of like religious artwork and imagery and narratives are about this idea of like being born again and a rebirth, and like obviously an animated loop that's recreated on top of itself over and over again. To me, kind of like embraces those themes. This is something I'm going to stop to say this. The quality of my process leads to sort of these psychedelic sort of like hypses, these hallucinatory vistas, or it's like the nature of the medium. So as an artist, like I can't always separate from me like what's like exploring this process and what are the ideas and the themes that I want to explore. To me, they're like inseparable. But this type of like work is like fast and hyper paced. So like a lot of the films like are about time and about quick evolution, and they're all about like starting with nothing, right? This piece starts with just a black square and ends with a black square and sort of repeats forever. This idea of like it's born and dies and is reborn and redies. So the work is about that, but it's also like what it is. Like that's what the work is actually. Going back to what we were talking about with Baby Eyes, a lot of the same thing where I'm dealing with like really primitive forms and thinking about symbols. And yeah, I don't want, again, never want to be like too specific, but like every, I think, person that's born feels like the first person that's ever been born. It's like the first, every new life is like the first time. And like you see like images of like their parents and like the snake, and I think of like temptation and like, garden of creation myths. I want this to be about my daughter essentially, but also about just like humanity and like the idea of birth. But if you look, there are like more contemporary symbols. I live in Boston, in the city, and we're surrounded by like construction and buildings, and these are literal I live near the airport, which 2 airplanes crashed in our airport today apparently, but on the runway.
Oh wow!
I know, crazy. And this is, I don't know if people are familiar with what I'm talking about, but newborn babies, like they often give them these baby cards, which are essentially really graphic black and white patterns. the thinking is that like newborns can't really see with color. They can't really see a lot of definition, but their minds and their eyes are stimulated by really graphic shapes. And my contention is that like that's always true for us for our whole lives, and that I'm trying to create an image structure, an image here, which again is sort of like a language, or you're not essentially looking at a picture, but there's like relationships between shapes. It's almost like math or a code that feels to me like kind of timeless or part of like the collective unconscious. But it's inspired by that idea of these like really graphic black and white images. And yeah, if you just keep watching it more and more, it's like, to me, there's a lot kind of like pre-Columbian like images in it. I'm thinking about like, Egyptian like hieroglyphics, and then like really structured like Art Deco, really geometric kind of design and Bauhaus era stuff. So it's just like a mish of like a lot of different styles and influences I love. But the main thrust for me was sort of like hyper graphic, black and white with a central eye. It's about vision. It's about rebirth. It's about growth. Yeah, and for me, like, these are some of the first time I've done these 5-second loops. So, that's the longer story where it's like, yeah, and I've seen this coming my whole life, but like the older I get, the more responsibilities I have, and having kids is, adds a whole another level to that. I used to work on my films, and some of the longer ones we might take a look at today, for like a year, and I would like work on them 8-12 hours a day, and like it was the majority of my life outside of teaching was working on these pieces. But yeah, being a full-time professor and having a kid, and thinking about the way information is consumed online, like it seemed like a really good idea to do square format, shorter loops, and play with that. So this piece, New Life, was one of my early pieces that I was like really proud of. As like a short loop, I felt like it was concrete, and like I'm kind of a perfectionist with a lot of my work, but it's like you can't pull it apart. Like it's like completely harmonious. And the way I was talking about Goodnight Moon as a book, almost like it just feels like it's a perfect self, and it was a short square piece. And so for me, that was like sort of a lot of what I was just even thinking about when I was making this piece, is how to make that interesting and keep it cohesive, and use these blockier shapes, because you might see the work I've been doing more recently, and like North Star and the piece I've been making currently over the past 6 months. It's very fine detail. I'm like, whatever reason, like super drawn to really high, fine line detail, black and white. And so saying again, like seeing that my work with color is so popular, and having a lot of cool like things that I've learned working with these like more graphic styles, like I am inherently drawn to, right now at least where I'm at, like I just want the most intense fine detail ever. I don't know why, but that's my inclination. So this piece was, yeah, in a lot of ways me like forcing myself not to do that, because I think a lot of information gets lost anyways to the viewer, and it doesn't matter, quite frankly. And it's super laborious to do the stipling that I've been doing in my current work, but it just feels what I should be doing right now. And that's just a longer discussion, but as an artist, I just need to listen to my gut and what's going on and kind of trust it and follow that rather than what's popular or what I think will be more successful. I think I was trying to say this before, I'm not sure I said this, but I was just really lucky that I had a long career before this space, because I don't feel driven by the market. And I've been doing this long enough that like seeing things come and go and hype and all that stuff, I feel like I'm like really locked into like a mission and like a process and a path. It can be hard in this space, I think, for artists to not follow everything and like kind of lose their North Star.
Well, I think it's so cool about seeing all these works together is you can really see kind of evolution and like these different moments that you've been interested in certain things. Like with this work, I feel like it's very much kind of about these like design principles. And like, as you said, kind of like pre-Columbian or ancient Egyptian, but then also Bauhaus and Art Deco. So it's kind of this almost like, huge, like big bird's eye view of, the evolution of visual vocabulary. But then the more recent works, like in the other rooms, you've works like Deep End and other works that are almost more about like narrative illustration. And I think but when you see them all together, there isn't a departure. It's just kind of different moments that you're interested in kind of teasing on different threads and exploring that visually.
Yeah, thanks. So as a professor, I'll just say like I mainly taught like experimental and non-narrative animation. But the whole key is like you can't avoid narrative in time-based work. Like there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So no matter how abstract or experimental you're being, there is narrative there. And I've always wanted my work to play in those worlds where like you're watching it like there's a story, like but it defies sort of traditional narrative. and feels, again, yeah, it's its own unique expression, but like each piece really is a reflection of when I made it. And yeah, these different influences sort of like emerge from it. It's good for me to talk about. That's why I'm really happy to do this today, by the way, because it's really healthy for me to talk about these pieces and look at them and kind of say, like, what was I doing or thinking about when I was making them? Because really, when I make these pieces, I try not to think that way. I really try to listen to them and let them tell me where to go, and be like, not be too overbearing, or like, I don't want to try too hard, like directly to be smart or like thoughtful. I want it to like kind of happen, emerge. I want the piece to emerge. And then after the fact, I can look back and kind of understand what I was doing. But yeah, every piece I make hopefully feels like really distinctly, kind of stylistically has its own unique quality. That's something that is important to me. While there's clearly overlap in like method and imagery in all my pieces, each one is really trying to tackle a different kind of theme or angle and really type of movement. So that's something I don't talk about a lot, because there's a lot of images and themes, and again, like kind of narrative structure in the work, but a lot of what I'm thinking about is just like the way it moves. And we were saying that before, like it's magic. Like this is, to me, animation is like magic. It still is every day. That's why I'm obsessed with doing it. It's so exciting. You don't really know what it's going to kind of look like until you do it. And like the way I'm working, I'm playing with like really all over the place. Things are shifting and changing at the same time. And it's really hard for me to like visualize in my head how it's really going to feel until it's made. And to me, it feels like alchemy. Like I'm putting in all these ingredients, and then I get this thing that comes out, and then I see it and I get to play with it, and then I keep developing it and it comes out that way. And it's just like about different types of movement. And talk about going back to sound too, like when I do the sound design and you can listen to New Life with the sound, like the sound design of New Life too, to me is like, there's a specific rhythm to this. It's not that just the shapes themselves and the forms are not just really graphic and structured. I want the movement to feel sort of like very chunky and structured and blocky. And to me, sort of like gears are like a factory thing. So like, it's hard for me to put it into words, but like the way this piece moves, it's got like, I'm using my hands and no one can see me, but it's got like this push and pull in all these different parts. And to me, it feels very geometric in movement. And that's also kind of, each piece is just playing with different types of movement. It's pretty obvious that like as an artist, if you're like an expressionist like me, or trying to like, you're always going to make your best work if it's personal to you. That's a pretty obvious point, right? Like if you know yourself the best, you know your experience the best, and nobody is you. So like you have the chance to be most unique in that way. So really my job is to really be personal and try to not hold back at all in my work, and try to like really be honest with myself and the work. And that's part of like why I'm an artist and love doing the process, where to me it feels like it's how to like grow find myself as a person every day. But you also need to like, you're making an artwork that's within context of the rest of the world and with the rest of human history, and it's in dialogue with everything else. So it needs to like reflect other influences in the world and other, so you need to do research, and you need to, if you're going to make a piece, like you need to think about the influences and things you can find that already exist that can inform you as an artist. And then you need to think about all the things that are just yours and personal to you. And like a lot of art making is sort of like the combination of those things. And that's why we're never going to run out of artworks to make. And no artist can either, because it's just sort of like infinite. But yeah, I hope my work feels like sort of like strangely familiar to a lot of people. And I think that's because I'm trying to make it about like everything, but also kind of like really deeply kind of personal in my
Well, I think there's something very
experience.
inherently generous about your work, in that you're ultimately allowing us to see your process and the immediacy of your just kind of decision making. And so the final output is both the output and all of the steps that were taken to get to that output. And it's like this kind of magic of being able to see behind the curtain, and yet somehow still be kind of of like the illusion of it. So I think that's an interesting thing that I think is very engaging and relatable also.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love that. Yeah, I hope people think about the artist behind the work when they watch it. It's kind of what I was saying before, and what you're implying now, that like you're watching the artist kind of thought process unfold in front of you, and the work is kind of handmade and has a lot of handmade qualities. And if you see, I scan each frame, it's reworking the same thing and scan it. So all my pieces have sort of like, you can see like a lot of debris and like an inherent sort of like camera jitter quality to it. And I just hope it comes through. It's like, wow, this was like authentically made, someone like working on paper and like putting it out there and like kind of unedited, like you're saying, in raw. I definitely want that effect to come through. honestly, one of the first questions I'm always asked when I'm talk to anybody about my work is like, how long does it take? So I also like that my work raises that question, because it takes a really, really long time. It's very hard to express to people how much I draw and how much I love to draw. I think I've been pretty prolific actually, but like my process is super slow. So night vision specifically, again, it's like 1,440 frames. I can only do like 5 to 10 frames a day. But if you add that up every day over a year, like it adds up quite fast, right, to a lot. It's all ink and whiteout, and this was, again, a piece where like I really love exploring just black and white, and I think this is one of my most abstract pieces. And thinking, again, we can talk about influences and stuff if you want to, but this is a piece where I really like honed in on the central kind of image of the eye in the middle, or kind of the star in the middle, and really playing back and forth with like the idea of vision, the human body, the heavens, the physical world. And because it's sort of like consistently centered, to me, it does become sort of like very hypnotic and meditative, like a mandala, where I love that people are sitting up close to it. If you get up close or zoom in, so like it's basically you're immersed inside of it, and it's very cool when it's displayed in real life that way too, because I see this work in a lot of my pieces as like almost environmental. Like, yeah, you can take the whole thing in as an image, but like you can sort of like get in it like a painting and sort of see the middle of it and have a lot of the other stuff going on in the periphery. I've compared this work in the past to like generative art in a lot of ways, and this was my super rare Genesis piece that I think a lot of people know this by now. And there's another way to sort of explore the medium of minting my work, but Art on Internet, who collected Paper Trail, collected this piece, and with them we split it up into every individual frame of Night Vision is its own one. This is the Night Vision series. Great collection, a very cool way to, if you watch Night Vision, the piece right here, and then explore the Night Visions collection later, you get to see every individual frame, as its own work of art with its own title and even metadata that kind of talks about what's going on in the frame. And that's the way I see my work too, is like when I make this piece, Night Vision, every single frame to me was like worthy of an image. Kind of going back to what I was saying, why I got into this method in the first place. That as a painter, I would kind of keep reworking an image, kind of like what you're seeing here. And it's like, wow, each variation of this image is cool. How do I stop? Or like, how do I know when to stop, or which one's the right one? And that like each layer of this piece is interesting in its own way and feels like part of the same whole piece. So to me, like these works are like a collection of images that are all interwoven together, where each image represents the whole piece, is its own piece, and can carry itself as its own piece. But then there's like this, when you watch them all together, obviously there's like, we're saying, that magic of seeing how they all interrelate to each other. But yeah, I've done a lot of one-of-one signed prints for Night Vision series holders, and I really like the way they look as still images as well. But to me, yeah, this is one of my most meditative and abstract pieces, and really thinking about, I play a lot with depth in my work, like that there is, like I'm creating the illusion of space, but they're also very flat and two-dimensional. Something, again, that like, as a painter, this was sort of like ingrained in me growing up. A painting is a 2D surface, and you're creating the illusion of depth through like, image making and perspective and things like that. And as a painter, like I'm very interested in playing with the push and pull between, this is an illusion of this image is an illusion of something, but it's also just paint on canvas. It's a flat image. It's both at the same time. And so in my work, I'm always, for whatever reason, really interested in that sort of like, if you watch Night Vision long enough, it's sort of like it has depth and then it doesn't, in my mind. Like it keeps flattening itself and going in and out and back on itself. And I'm just going to keep riffing for a second. I also just like beyond like of movement. Again, I feel like this piece like hopefully has a hypnotic quality to it. Where like you're looking at this as a work. Like people look at art, but like some art, like op art or whatever, like, or certain types of music, especially like ambient type of music, it's like the quality is almost like takes your brain. It's like it like changes your brain's the state of your mind and mood. And I do think a lot of my work when I make it, and why I'm attracted to it when I see what I'm making, is that it soothes me. It's hypnotic. It's meditative. It draws me in. It takes over all my other senses, and there's so much like sort of detail and constant fluctuations with it that I sort of lose myself in it, or it feels like a life form that I'm just sort of like, yeah. So for whatever reason, I want art to do that for me. And when I make art, I think a lot of it has to do with that. Like my process, like I was just saying, is very labor intensive, very slow, very detailed, almost to the point of like, I'm making it so much harder than it has to be. Because like I like how long it takes, and I like going slow and thinking about like, wow, I'm putting in all this detail into every frame. I guess it like slows me down and makes me feel like I have a lot of control over the situation because I can put in every detail. So that's also a quality of my work in night vision, is that like it just goes off the page, right? I want it to feel like it goes on forever. Like it's like not like really like thinking about framing it inside the image. And there's like the same level of complexity and density of image across the whole thing. So I almost feel like it's like a Jackson Pollock painting. It's all over.
I was just going to say that, and I was also going to relate that back. And there's a feeling of infinity of all over. And if you look at a Jackson Pollock painting, you can see a small little zoom in on a bit, and it's reflective of the larger thing too. There's like this macro micro kind of relationship. But I was also thinking about Jackson Pollock and like those famous images of Jackson Pollock painting and those famous videos in like the 1950s, where you can really see the process. And he has these these drips over I guess it was like sheets of glass, and he's filmed them underneath the process, which I think relates very much to what you're doing as well, as you're allowing us literally to see the process as it happens, which comes the output at the end. So I think that's
totally, yeah, great comment. I am an expressionist, so like obviously the abstract expressionist, like I vibe with the philosophy of like making a work of art is like an act.
In the arena.
Yes, 100%. And my process makes me like show up every day because I'm reworking the same thing, right? I can't erase it or go back and make changes. So I'm sort of like, I'm locking into the moment, and my pen is a weapon, 100%. I am like attacking this image and fighting with it. It's a battle. And that's the way again, not every artist has to feel that way, but like for me, it is for like that. So yeah, I totally see that. And I love what you're saying about the smaller parts represent the whole. And I'm fascinated with fractals too. And again, thinking about timing, it doesn't look like maybe a direct influence, but just those videos of zooming in on fractals forever. I don't know if people are familiar with those.
Yeah, like a Power of 10 also, that Charles movie.
Yes, exactly. Same thing. Yeah, I love that film. This idea that like, yeah, this piece is like, you're infinitely zooming in or zooming out. And I really do believe this, like very deep down, that like what's going on, this is symbolic, but also I think like, this is the truth. Like the universe, we are part of the universe. The universe is this huge thing. We are a reflection of the universe. We're the tiny bit too, right? Of the bigger thing. And then there's tinier bits that make us up that are tiny, like our DNA strand is like us essentially. And it just keeps going down and out forever. And like, essentially I am the universe. I am everything. There is no time. There's no beginning or end. Like it's all here at once. And yeah, hopefully my work sort of like taps into that quality. So also talk about Jackson Pollock, like, or like the act of making it, I want people to have like a reaction to my work. Like I want it to sort of like punch you in the gut or like slap you in the face kind of feeling. Like you have to, there's an intensity to it or an energy to it that's sort of undeniable. I'm really attracted to that in art, where you kind of can't look away, whether it's not good or bad. It's just like, there's like real true expression and like some lived experience through that object, and I can feel it. Mm-hmm. And working with my students, like the biggest thing that I think separates typically like amateurs from professionals is just like they don't have a narrow enough focus or limitations on the process. It goes all over the place. It's too messy conceptually or visually. So yeah, I was just really trying to not use any collage, not use any paint or color, limit the human imagery, and just sort of see what would happen with it. And again, because my work goes over the course of a year, forcing myself to stick with that central circle was like an act of every day being like, you're not straying from that. Don't fucking stray from that, dude.
I really love that perspective.
So there's like, to me, it's like a piece about restraint, that it's like, it wants to explode, but it's staying in, it's an atom with like the central, it's like, it's in this state of like, anything that'll knock it off balance, it's going to just like explode. And it's just like in a perfect state of equilibrium. But it's, if that makes any sense. Now that the Vision Pro just came out, like, I feel like there's a whole new context to sort of like seeing the hands like this. But like I was saying earlier with sound design and the way I see these films, like, to me, like me making the film is part of the film when you're watching it, right? Because you're seeing it being made in real time. You're watching it evolve, and the hand is sort of in the work, and like myself sort of in the work. So at its most basic, when I started making this piece, yeah, it was sort of like put them in my body while they watch me make it. So this is you're me making this piece essentially, kind of, but also there's that meta step where it's like when I was making it on paper. It's very hard to explain, but I was drawing my hands in the image. So there's this like triple layer of like, it's me in the work drawing. I'm drawing me in the work, drawing me in the work. If that makes sense. So if you watch this piece and as it evolves, like I sort of fall into the frame and come back in. I'm drawing the piece itself within the piece. So it's like it has that meta layer as an image, but when I'm making it in real life, it had that extra layer. And to me, that really got me off. and I love that, like I was just looking at my hands. When I'm drawing, all I'm doing all day is looking at my hands, drawing on a piece of paper, right? And I'm always looking at my hands. And hands, I think, are just, I deal with them in the next piece we might look at to the right here too. Hands are just weird. Everyone right now, if you're listening, just look at your hands and like think about drawing them and all the different folds and permutations of them. And I just wanted to bring the hand into the work, and I really liked redrawing them a bunch of times. And then, yeah, I definitely felt about like it's like a video game or like a virtual reality space, or like when we're in someone's body, like that's the way the world looks. Like your hands, you can see that part with like sort of puddles has my feet in it. You can see frames from the animation are being hung up in the room in the animation itself. So I really thought about this piece as a step-by-step sort of like pretzeling on itself in representation and meaning. And in my mind, sort of like a primal scream. I can talk about the specific image. Here's going back to like going layers within, but like going in my inner ear into like a cell, into a molecule, into an atom, back through a door into the room. The disembodied like eyeball, it's sort of like, I'm playing with a lot of different things in this piece. And if you don't know, this is collected by Vincent Van Gogh, which is amazing. I'm really proud to be in that collection. And I'll just tell you again, going back, like I've been sharing my work online, and the more I make it, the more I think about ways that I can share these pieces in smaller bits and pieces. But if you watch the blank page, you'll notice that every 5 seconds, it's like a different segment where almost the whole frame goes to white. So you might just watch it for a few seconds and you'll see that. We're kind of going to full white every 5 seconds. That's the way I sort of structured this piece.
Yeah, I was about to ask, I know you touched on it a little earlier, but many of your works begin with just a black or a white frame, and they feel like this never-ending loop in a way. Can you touch on that a bit and why you choose to do that in your work?
Well, I'll say like most of them are like this sort of like one straight ahead loop. So what I was trying to say though is like these 5 second segments can all be looped, and they're loops within loops. So every 5 seconds, if you just looped it by itself, like this car driving through the tunnel to the crash to the beginning of that segment to this segment, and I've posted these before online. They're all inherent loops. So like this is a loop within a loop, and there's all this crazy stuff going on. Why loops? It's like conceptually like what this is all about for me. That they're moving paintings. So not only it's not, even calling it a loop is the wrong kind of term. It's like it never begins or it never ends. It's just constantly going, and hopefully kind of feels like each of, again, if you sit with it for long enough, that it could kind of just go on forever, and that because it loops and because it's rewatchable, I think, going back to talking about non-narrative kind of structures, when you watch it for the first time, you have a reaction to one of my pieces. Once it loops again and you watch it again, watching it again, you watch it differently because you've already seen it one time, right? So you sort of know what happens, but there's a lot going on, but you sort of get it, and then you watch it again, and then it starts over again. And hopefully, if I'm doing my job well, people really stick with these for a while. And I recommend, if we're up to me, like just like with paintings, honestly, like sit with it for half an hour, like give the art a chance to like have an effect on you. Like you'd be surprised what happens. And when I teach, man, sometimes we have conversations about a 30-second animation for like 3 hours. There's a lot to talk about and think about when you actually like stop to do it with a work of art often. But if you watch my work on loop like over a dozen times, I really do think like it feels like it's going somewhere, even though it's repeating, because there's like layers of meaning and experience that you have with the piece. At least hopefully, yeah.
I was gonna say, they're very dense. There's a lot of information, and I think this one also feels explicitly about mark making, which is really beautiful. I mean, literally the hand you start out with literally making marks. And that self-referentiality to me also kind of reminds me of like works by William Kentridge, who often like casts himself as a character in his own kind of animations. So it feels very much about like the act of making.
Yeah, Kentridge is obviously like a huge inspiration for me. And yeah, the way he approaches animation is like performative and mixes it with his body and spaces is definitely super interesting. Yeah, I'll just say like this piece to me is also like just talking about emotionally, like we've been saying before, like I think there's a lot of sadness in this piece, but I also think it's got a lot of energy and excitement and feels really, for me, like, I don't know if you guys can, yeah, there's so many things to talk about here. It starts out with like computer screens within computer screens. I just was playing with a lot of forms and a couple of things like we were saying too, just a ton of work, by the way. So every time it goes to white, that means I'm whiting out the entire image and I have to start redrawing again. So one benefit of my method is that like the previous frame is already there when I rework it for the next one. But when I go to all white, I'm kind of starting from scratch and doing a lot of stippling and drawing over and over again. And again, sort of the pain and the repetition of doing that is part of this sort of piece for me.
Yeah, that's very meditative too. And actually almost, maybe I'm going off on a tangent here. There's a Kusama aspect as well with all of these dots and these kind of dense, like almost constellations that become other forms that are legible. But there's this like constant abstraction and then like re-representation that kind of comes together and you're always waiting for some resolution.
Yes, and I'm really interested in that sort of visual static, and yeah, in this piece too. Like I'm playing with movement in a lot of ways that I haven't with more of my work. So just to say, like we might look at the next piece in a second, where like it's very sort of like two-dimensional, and the figure is moving around the frame a lot. In this piece, there's actually quite a bit of like perspective and movement through space, and sort of what we might think of as more traditional animation. It's like, oh, I'm like drawing a line. Tears are falling. He's driving through a tunnel. The world is spinning. So actually, and for me, like there's a lot more almost traditional animation in this piece than I typically explore. There I am, like this is me blowing up the world, grabbing the moon and blowing up the world with it or whatever. Like I love that imagery. And one thing that's again very cool about my process, it's so slow that it comes about so slowly that I could never come up with like some of this, like these motifs on my own. And talking about why I decided to like work this way is like because I think the most interesting stuff comes out this way when I don't pre-plan it or really know where I'm going. I'm not creative enough to be this like spontaneous. I don't know, like these things that come up while I'm making it. The piece really just kind of like shows me what to do. And yeah, I like that view out the window and the guy. I'm assuming like the timeline of these videos are exactly the same for everyone viewing it, but I don't know if that's true. But
it is.
It is? Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So like that view out the window when I was drawing and collapsed on the paper, like that was the literal view out my window. And so it was like important to me to like bring in those like very specific. The Earth hits Boston, or the moon hits Boston, so that's where I live. That is sort of like my self-portrait going into my inner ear, into like getting really small. By this time, I thought about the eyes sort of become like again, like I was saying, sort of like a profile photo for me. So think about the eye moving through space is like I can roll an eyeball. By an animator, you just got to think about like how do I make it seem like an eyeball is rolling by reworking the same drawing, or like these. For me, it's just very interesting as an animator what I'm doing here. I'll just say that. Like every frame is one by one being drawn up from the last one. So they're all plays with like how to manipulate an image from the previous image to create like moving what you would typically do with like, with page by page using in-betweens to create like more traditional forms of movement. And yeah, thinking of different ways to explode the frame to go all white. So you'll see like white represents like fluid that's coming up over the hands. Here's white's like the earth exploding. Here's white's going to be like the white light at the end of the tunnel, the door to some other realm. Here the hands were kind of falling. The white is the hand itself. The segment, the white is like kind of going off into the distance. This is like my binary, like this is how I visualize like the blockchain working. Like basically that whole last segment is like just rectangles being cut up by two and twisted over and over again until they get smaller and smaller. Which to me was like I'm like drawing like pixels by hand. And there was something just for me that was like poignant about that. And a way to end this film where it's sort of like, because this film is by hand, but I destroyed it as I made it. This is the last segment of it. Now it's a digital video. And it's like, what is this thing? It's like a hand-drawn digital video. That push and pull between it being handmade and being a digital video is also something I like to play with a lot in the work. I do think about my viewer, but not generally. It's not like one feel. It's everything we're saying. I'm trying to like unlock the infinite for them. I'm trying to do a lot of things. I want to make work that, again, just feels so intensely thought through and worked on that like it's undeniably like is what it is. So I just try to work as hard. The feeling though of this piece is like human express. I'll just say that I'm an expressionist, right? And a lot of it I'm just trying to like play with like really the powers of human emotion and expression. The ways that like art, from music, or writing can like make people feel deeply. And that to me, it's not happy or sad or hopeful or any one specific feeling. It's just like a sense of heavy feelings or like lots of feelings or being in touch with their feelings. My work is about feelings. It's very human. And I want people to relate to it as like a human being, like the human experience as a human being. And in the way that like a pop song or like a short story is like, you're often put in, right, in a song or a short story, like you're often put into a narrative of someone else's life, and you sort of see the world or feel what they're feeling. And I'm trying to do that, I guess, for my viewer in a lot of ways. Mind frame, it's like, it's called mind frame. It's like a frame of mind. It's definitely about the mental state of a person. And I always have like multiple layers of meaning in my titles, but like I was saying earlier, like it's actually literally playing with the frame, right? Like this figure is basically bouncing around the 16:9 frame, almost like they're like a DVD logo, on a screensaver. And what I'm specifically doing with this film, if you watch it, like the one rule I gave myself was that the eyes are going to constantly be moving around the image. And like the ears and the nose and the mouth and the hands, they just need to kind of catch up with it or sort of relate to it and find its way. But I had this mental image before I started where it's like, wow, can I just sort of like smear this figure around the painting? Just kind of keep moving them around. Like I was saying before, like there's depth to this image, but it's like the figure's right up against the camera. I do this a lot of my work for whatever reason. Like they're always like almost like super close-ups. And yeah, to me, like there's a lot going on in this piece, and a lot of it is like hyper expressive. If you would slow it down and look like this, there's just like, so there's 1,440 frames. Like there's so many different expressions on this guy's face, and I'm always just trying to shift it around and move it. And you'll just notice in the pupils, like every single frame, I'm trying to do a different type of reflection. Like all my pieces, I just start out with nothing, the blank page. I just start out with one line. And as I started making this and seeing how it evolved, I was just like, there's something super fascinating about layering a human figure on top of itself, like just the multiples of body parts. So I was often thinking about like sort of like Hindu gods or goddesses with like 64 arms and like eyes on all sides of their head, like sort of this figure where it's like it's implying like they're moving through space and time, but they're also this like multi-dimensional, multi-bodied figure, and they're inhabiting a mind space, a mental space. I've talked about that a lot, I think, in this tour already, but like my work is sort of like in sort of this like mental landscape.
I think this one's really interesting because obviously the eye is a motif that you've incorporated many times, and there's a third eye and just the sort of like kind of earth symbolism of the eye, but then here it's like the eye is really looking back at her, and there's this interesting kind of co-identification between the viewer and then the work itself.
Yeah, I think about eyes a lot, obviously, and I've talked about it a bit. There's so many different reasons why, but specifically with this piece, I wanted, and I think it's hard not to, like the viewer to sort of like their eyes sort of tracking the figure moving around. And that's one of the reasons I'm just attracted to the eye as a symbol, is that I feel like our brains are programmed to look at people's eyes, at faces. We see faces everywhere, right? And eyes are the window to the soul, and like we're looking at people's faces generally when we're engaged with them in like a one-to-one level, or like really like, a human-to-human level. So yeah, I really like that idea of my work is watching you when you're watching it. And also like so it makes you think about yourself, and hopefully relate or put yourself into the piece. But yeah, also I think this is sort of like a metaphor for what my art is. It's just me on the canvas, like sort of like screaming at you. I'm alive. Like I really think sometimes it's that dumb. Like my work is just, I was here I am, hear me, like,
Well, that's really what mark making is, right? From like
Yes,
cave paintings to today. However, we're making a mark. It's a gesture of asserting our existence.
that's essentially what I'm asserting my existence. I love that. A lot of what I'm doing, maybe just for myself in the act of making it, and then yeah, like why make art or music or literature? Like, what's the point at all? But like, so much of it is just to like put ourselves out there and in relationship with the world and show what's like going on with us and trying to get it out of you. And a lot of it to me is like mysterious and unexplainable, and I don't have the answers. But like, this is me, and like, um, yeah, through my process, because it's so kind of intuitive and stream of conscious. Like a lot of it feels like me. I'm trying to find myself. Like that's such a cheesy phrase, but if you think about it, like literally, like I'm trying to locate myself and like what's going on in this life and like in my consciousness. And like I just want to make sure I'm centered, I guess. Or like I really want to be in connection with myself, and maybe there's some underlying fear or some reason why I feel the constant need to just keep anchoring myself back to myself. And so that's what a lot of this piece is about. And yeah, to me too, it's just like it's intense. I want it to feel intense and bombastic and crazy and overwhelming. I've also said like I'm not above like I think part of what I'm trying to do is also just sort of showing off is the wrong word, but sort of like flex my drawing muscle. Like I'm gonna draw hands and faces over and over again. Like take time, just like I'm just like look how much work I put into this thing, or like I don't know what that's about necessarily, but I think I'm again really want to really make a big effort at something. I want to be effortful at something and like really show it. And I think a lot of like the process for this piece again was like kind of what I was saying with night vision, like for like basically a better course of a year, just like every day waking up, moving these eyes forward, one more frame, moving these eyes forward, redrawing the face, keeping it moving. Day to day, it's very slow and methodical, and it's almost like it gives me a rubric to stick with, so I can kind of go nuts every day with the drawing, but have it have some overarching thematic structure and right, like some like through line through the whole thing, because again, it's very similar to my work. I would say, like I hope it's like on the verge of exploding into just like pure chaos, but it holds itself together in this like harmony or this equilibrium, but that it's like on the verge of like the way I feel my creative self or myself is like on the verge of just like complete rupture, and all over the place. I feel like creativity or expression is like a fire hose. It's all over the place, and like art is a tool to funnel it and concretize it and like narrow it down into something manageable. Yeah, so both of these pieces are open eyes. It's flower on the left and signal on the left, flower on the right. And they both come from the film Open Eyes, which is not in this gallery because it hasn't been minted, but it's on my website and I've shared it a bunch. And this relates to our whole discussion of the way I've minted NFTs as 1 minute, one of ones. I've created like collections of the individual frames. I have editions where you can, all the variations of the editions are things you can switch between. So for Open Eyes, it's a 1 minute piece, which you can go watch. I didn't want to mint it right away because I've been playing with like displaying it all over the world. It's been on towers, like buildings and monoliths, and it's been displayed at Times Square and in different orientations. And like all my work, like I was saying, like, and specifically this piece, a lot of it is like every part of this film interrelates to other parts of it. And it's not just a like 1 minute beginning to end sort of piece. It has all these different ways to break it apart and explore it. So when Avant Art reached out, like now it's been like over a year or more, as an animator, you're like, okay, let's do physical prints. What do I want to do? Like, obviously can't have a 1 minute animation be a physical print, right? And Open Eyes was the piece that I was wrapping up and finishing at the time we started talking. And I was thinking about how can I translate what I'm exploring in this piece to physicals. And I'm really, I already talked about this with Night Vision series, but I love my work as prints and still images and want my work displayed as tactile physical objects as well as digital videos. So these are the NFT representations of the real world prints, right? So Open Eyes Flower is a lenticular print. It has multiple kind of frames. When you move your head past it or walk by it, it sort of shifts the way it looks. And Open Eyes Signal is a UV textured print. So it's got really, the ink is sort of like caked on there and is really thick and textured. So I'm trying to explore two different things in these pieces, but I want them to kind of be in dialogue with each other. And I'm playing with this way of doing a triptych where I'm using 3 elements from the film together for each piece. So there's a lot of, again, like loops within loops and patterns here. But for Flower, it was like, pretty obvious. I wanted to do a really short animation so that you could fit it on the print. And I thought about this idea of like seasons and flowering, and I can talk forever, so I won't go into it too long. But as a print, it's really beautiful. I have one in my home, and to the collectors, there's 20 editions of that. And they're like, my work is animated in the room as you move past them, and they're really beautiful. And I think most people here are familiar by now with avant art, but their quality is just incredible. And it was just a really cool opportunity to work with them and play with different variations of how I could bring my animation to physical. Hopefully it's something I do again in the future, particular printing. But the NFT is like the animated version of, it's sort of my interpretation of how you can see sort of like I cut this up into strips of the animation, so it's sort of like moving in front of you, even though you're not moving your head, obviously. Although it would be cool in a space like oncyber, maybe a way to do this, or could be, where like the physical, you move around the image on oncyber, it reflects the changes, which would be cool. OpenEye Signal just dropped in January. It's my latest piece, and I actually just got my frame proof back yesterday. I haven't had time to hang it up or do like an unboxing video at home with it yet, but it's beautiful. And what I was trying to explore with that piece was texture in my work. So hopefully if you're looking at my animations in the gallery, obviously these are flat, two-dimensional files on your computer screen, which is flat, but you can see that they were textured when they were made, and that I'm using real ink and whiteout and building them up. That's why I don't hide all the debris. That's why I like to emphasize the physical quality of them, and is really a huge part of my work that is kind of lost in the way that it's disseminated online. But when I printed like night vision series prints or prints that I've done previously, they've always just been essentially flat, prints, like what we think of a print, ink on paper. This is the first time I got to use this tech where like, you're gonna have to go on my account and find the videos to really understand what it looks like in real life. But like the texture is very thick, almost like it's like been stamped with wax on like but the detail is super fine. So every single dot that I make in the image is like a really structured, like, piece of ink. It's just gorgeous. And when you see it in person, it looks like the way my drawings look when I make them, which are destroyed when they're, as I make them. But like, so very cool opportunity to make a piece with avant art that allowed me to like print my work and bring it back with texture. Open eyes is obviously about eyes again, and a lot of things we've already discussed. Like opening your eyes is to me like the ultimate metaphor of like being awake, being alive, being aware, which is kind of what my work is all about. And there's a lot of different playing with the eye motif, and it's I think a very like kind of visionary piece. And I was playing with, in that piece was like very rapid transitions and a lot of fluid movement. I was saying it's compared to Mind Frame, which is very expressive and human. Like I feel like Open Eyes is more of like a direct beam into your forehead. It's like very graphic and quick, and kind of like, to me, like going into, I never want to say, it's not like literally going into outer space, but it's like going into space, like sort of lifting off into this higher plane. And so this motif of like these eyes bulging out with tears streaming down, with sort of like, again, almost like a third eye in the upper panel, like expanding outward in this sort of like time space map. And then this figure in a sea of eyeballs, almost on like a third, planet made a vision. Like to me, like, again, just like, I love the symbolism. I'm not going to say it's specifically about anything. It's not, it's like, it's what came out in the process. And then looking back, like what I thought was just like extremely powerful juxtaposition of images. So that's why it's a still frame. And yeah, it's not, the night vision series are still frame NFTs also. And North Star, a bunch of North Star stills. But yeah, I'm aware like moving image work is obviously really exciting and makes a lot of sense for NFTs. But like when you see, if you could see these still images in real life on a high-res monitor, or the prints themselves, I'm really proud of them. And I think still images are a really important part of my practice and kind of context of my work. That like all my pieces are made up of a collection of stills, and there's so much still imagery in each piece that you really can never appreciate unless you see them that way.
I also wanted to say, just if everyone kind of steps back a little bit, it's really beautiful to be able to see the two kind of columns of works and then Blue Moon in the middle. I think it's a really cool thing in this gallery, just to be able to obviously be with the work, but just to see these kind of through lines visually. So again, shout out to the AOTM team and Pablo, Giga, and Casey for putting this gallery together. It just looks really gorgeous.
I agree. It's fantastic.
That's a great
it's so
view.
Cool to see them lined up that way. And yeah, kind of like you're doing it now virtually, but like, you know, if you've walked into a space with my work like this, like it does sort of just ask you to chill out and take it in and sort of like,
Which is that
it's a
feels
vibe.
unusual for kind of digital artworks, right? We're kind of looking at things on Twitter feeds or random URLs, and also just actually kind of be with the work in a way that is similar but very different and still very true to this space from similar to kind of more traditional is really beautiful.
Yeah, it was awesome. So I told this story a few times before, but just getting into, every artist deals with getting into the space and like having trusted partners or where do you start? And 2021 obviously was like, there's just so much going on. Super Chief Gallery, which I think a lot of people here know about now, they've been around for over a decade and actually showed some work at gallery showings they had in parties over like 10 years ago, which is really cool and shows kind of their vision that they've always been open to showing artwork that was like, I guess, less traditional gallery friendly, or just kind of mixing up different mediums and doing really big curated shows with lots of different artists at the same time. And so they had a physical NFT gallery in Manhattan in 2021. I knew them. I wanted to get into the space. I wanted to do something really meaningful. So it's kind of looking back. I mean, the space moves so fast, and it's a different kind of world. But when I had my first show with them, it was like I treated it like a more traditional gallery show. I planned for a lot of months. We had a press and the Juxtapose magazine, and did a lot of like exhibition planning, and actually hung the pieces up in the gallery in New York. And it was a very exciting time in the space because 2021 was just a lot of activity and a lot of new entrants into the space. And it was also like a time when COVID was kind of waning and people were going out again. So these pieces were exhibited in the gallery in New York and minted at the same time. And yeah, for me, it's kind of like going back to what I was saying about getting support from collectors in the space. Like, I can't overstate enough how like life-changing it has been for me. It's been incredible. And that was one of the first moments where I had that show and the work minted out really quickly and had a really positive response. And I got to talk to really important people in the space kind of right away. And it felt like we all know about this space. Like, it's, in a lot of ways, it's very small. And if you're doing exciting work and kind of have the right connections to make, like, you can like know a lot of really interesting, cool people really quickly. And that's kind of what happened. So yeah, shout out to Super Chief for that. It was great. These two editions are like very hard to buy. They're always listed really highly, and they're cool. So yeah, Still Life with Lemons and Goodnight Moon are both editions of 30. I've talked about Blue Moon, but hopefully you can see just looking at it. Goodnight Moon, the original, it just has a different vibe. Like, the blue quality really does change like the work in a lot of different ways. But like I was saying, these square pieces were made in the several years after my daughter was born and more recently. And Still Life with Lemons, again, is another sort of challenge I set for myself. Kind of an obvious one is like, what would a still life look like in my style, essentially? As a museum educator, like, I'm really lucky that I got to work at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, which is like encyclopedic. So it's got work from like 8,000 BC to work from this year, and I like to do tours with students where I mix up different time periods and cultures to find make connections. And like really obvious ones are just like portraiture, and look at a Renaissance portrait, go look at a ancient Egyptian portrait bust, and then go look at a contemporary photograph portrait, and just like, what is a portrait? What does it mean in these different contexts? And just like, it's a really easy way to make really broad overarching connections about what art is and what expression is and what it's for and how it can look. And so, yeah, oftentimes it was like still lives or just like arrangements of objects is like just a classical category. And as an artist, it was like, all right, this is like a really clear challenge for me. It was also during COVID. I guess, we still are in COVID times, sort of. But it was like very much of like a stuck at home, one day after, every day is the same kind of repetition. There's like hand sanitizer and like
life
cleaning.
Was so still.
Yeah. So this again, getting into the weeds, like this is gonna, first of all, there's a lot of cool stylistic shifts and good. I'm like redrawing the same still life essentially 120 times in different styles, from very finely detailed, like kind of realism, to more like very hypergraphic, stylized, block printy quality. And so part of it is just a play of like fluctuating kind of like the aesthetic of the representation. But the big thing that was cool for me was like, I'm animating the light, right? I'm animating the light moving through the room, the way the light's casting off of different objects. There's translucent objects, there's objects, there's like light shining through different objects. And so, I taught art for so long. It's like, to me, it's just like the most almost boring, straightforward, sort of like classical arrangement of objects on the table. But what makes it exciting is the way the atmosphere, the lighting kind of moves around it. And then it lends itself to like emotional states and qualities. And then I couldn't help myself but add some like deeper, more mysterious things. So if you watch it, there's actually a figure that kind of goes through the back really fast, which to me is like, again, sort of like the shadow thing. There's sort of an emptiness quality to it, but there is like kind of human activity somewhere behind. The sun or the moon kind of flickers as an eyeball, kind of a callback to all my other work, and sort of thought about like something higher watching the scene.
And the rain too.
Yeah, and the rain comes in, which is kind of like obviously very surreal for like an indoor scene. There's actually a little skull that pops up on the teapot. The key sort of shifts and changes, kind of thinking, I don't know, about like security or insecurity, or like the flowers die and reblossom. I don't know. It's like it's pretty straightforward conceptually, but to me, it's like, again, I'm really proud of like the rigor of like the limitations I set for myself with that one.
Yeah, and it's really cool. This piece seems to draw inspiration from Spanish artist Francisco de Zurbarán's still life with lemons, oranges, and a rose painting. And it's great to see how you've seemingly, brought it to life with your animations. And I love how you play with the lighting in this piece as well.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy you called that out. I don't know if I've ever said that before, but yeah, the Spanish still life painters are huge inspiration for me. And a lot of what that work is about is obviously like impermanence, right? I guess all still lifes are about that. It's a snapshot in time of things that are like rotting or briefly just picked, and then showing different kind of like household wares, and like in a lot of ways they're representations of like your culture and the period that you lived in, and that my work, again, like with all these things we've been talking about, like this kind of modern anxiety, this quick pace to it. I wanted to create my version of a still life that represented, like the 2020s, and what it feels like to be alive in the United States for me. So I was saying, like, I think about this work in, like, if I did a museum tour, like Spanish still lives, we would look at those. We might look at like some Picasso, Cubist, still life paintings, and maybe.
I would bring in like a Tom Wesselman, like pop art still life,
yes.
those big ones. Like that's what I see, and there's like the beginning of this or the end of it.
Yes, also lemons are like yellow and very kind of dealing with making them, lemons are sour but sweet. Like I found a lot of kind of balance and symbolism with it. Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's just extremely simple, right? It's like repetition of like the same, like the beginning of the book, the first half and the second half are like, it's a loop, right? If you forget what the book is like, it sort of introduces all the things in the room, like there was a red balloon and bears with chairs, and then the second half of the book is like good night bears and chairs, good night all the things we just said. So like something like, I feel like really simple, like prayer to that, like recognizing the surroundings and then like saying good night to them is just very interesting. Saying good night to the moon, it's a kind of a lullaby, it's a bedtime story. So like just think about artwork that's supposed to like put you to sleep or put you in communion with like this quiet meditation. To me, it's like it's got that perfect balance between being very pedestrian and like it's a kid's book, but it feels so powerful and it feels like Buddhist wisdom or something when I read it. And like there's obviously like good night air, good night nothing. Like there's things in the book that are like, whoa, this is deeper. Like then it's letting on, right? And the imagery is just sort of so weird. I just love the images. So if you actually see Good Night Moon, like I just took the clock shape and made it a little trippier and drippier. I took the vase that's on the mantle and I cracked it. I took the cow jumping over the moon and made it, a more sort of like spiritual symbol of like, and there's just, again, a lot of imagery of like the moon and cows and a lot of ancient art and mythology. The tiger skin rug, like I tried to take all the imagery that's sort of just there in the book and then bring it into my mishmash of style. I just think is like a very there's kind of cool, fresh imagery. I like that bunny with like kind of like deep, dark set eyes, like an old wise bunny rabbit. It just, I really thought it was the perfect symbolism for me to play with. This space loves memetics. I'm talking about memes, right? This is exactly what I'm doing, where it's like when you're riffing on something that already has cultural meaning, the viewer already has all this like framework to build up on top of it, right? And that's why pop art works so well, because it's using pop cultural imagery and then, remixing it. And so like there's a familiarity with the viewer to like the context. And that's why memes in this space work, because there's like the backstory, like you understand the history of that meme or the format of it. and seeing how the person is varying it in the situation. So I'm taking existing IP and bringing it into a new form of expression. To me, it's like there's no good comparison. It's like a cover song. It's like my version of this timeless story. And also Margaret Wise Brown, like if you read, like she was extremely smart and knew what she was doing. And a lot of it has to do with what I was saying before, like early child, like it's actually a breakthrough, I think, in like early childhood sort of structure of a book, where before that books were not, they were not so lyrical, like, right? So like you can read Goodnight Moon to a baby who doesn't really understand what it means, and it still feels like what it's saying, because there's a sound to it. There's something pre-language about it. And that we're really interested in like archetypes and symbolism, and how to see ourselves in the world and how we relate to the world around us. So if you're familiar with her other books, they're all very repetitive, and they're all really trippy, in my opinion. I'm trying to think of what is the other one called with the mother and the rabbit, maybe Mother Rabbit. But the illustrations themselves are just amazing. So yeah, and I've talked about influences a bit, I think, for all the pieces here, but like if it's not clear, like I'm highly influenced by other work, and I'm always like, my antenna is always up to being like, what is my favorite work and why? And especially like in the museum, like, and as a collector, you know, here in the space and things like that, it's sort of like you can intellectualize it to a degree, but that at a certain point it's just like, this, I just can't get this out of my mind, or this is my favorite thing. I don't know why, but it is. And so I try to listen to that voice in my head and just be like, you like this a lot. You need to work with this, or like integrate it into your thinking about what you're making right now. Mm-hmm. Because I'm trying to steal it. It's basically kind of what I was saying. It's kind of impossible to say that because there's so many, but this is sort of, I guess, maybe an easy answer, but maybe like Joseph Campbell, just because his whole idea of archetypes and the hero's journey and symbolism was so influential to me as a young artist. It sort of unlocked what was going on with art for me. I'm talking about why I'm stealing from these things. I think there is a logic to art as like a language, or as like a vehicle, a communication device. And like as storytellers, as art makers, as music makers, like you're an idiot if you don't understand the history of why things work. Right? There's like story structure, and like people mention this all the time, but like you can't deny some of these like structures of like the most basic myths that keep coming up. So most people are familiar with Joseph Campbell, just like this idea that like, I grew up Jewish, so my personal tradition growing up was like a lot of Old Testament stuff and mythology. And obviously I'm like very aware of like Christian mythology and storytelling and Christian art specifically, because so much of it was a part of my studies as an artist growing up and such a big part of Western art. But I'm really into Eastern, spiritualism and we got really into Buddhism in high school and all these things. So like as a young artist, I was just like, all these myths and stories, they're all kind of the same thing. They're all getting at the same thing through different cultural lenses. All art deep down is about like the human experience and trying to understand like our place in it. And like, I'm a modern human being, like at the tip end of like all this history. And Joseph Campbell sort of was like unlocked, or like showed me like the obvious like thing that like there's actually like there's one big overarching sort of like narrative to your life. And art is powerful because we see ourselves in it, and we're all heroes on our own journey, and there's these stages to it. So I would go as far to say is like every one of these pieces in this gallery you're seeing is like, they're all depictions of that classical hero's journey, that rise up, that to reach a level of sort of like where you escape yourself, where you become one with everything, and then you sort of die and are reborn to live it again. Like it's the ultimate, it's the life cycle. It is like the structure of everything we're made of, and our lives, that we know we're part of something bigger, and that so as an artist, I'm like really trying to tap into that, and ideally like that my work can touch people after my current period. So that's something too. I think I did get a degree in art history ultimately when I went to school, but a lot of this is coming from the museum and my own like personal research. But like that, I want to make work like the work that inspired me. That sort of like we walk into the museum and it just feels like this. You don't need a lot of context to just get hit with this as a human being. This is right. Like it doesn't. I don't want my work to require a lot of like explanation necessarily, but just like that it just feels timeless and like hits no matter, hopefully in 100 years or 1,000 years or something, about the themes that I'm addressing and the symbolism and the quality of it that feels beyond its time. And again, talking about kind of like hype cycles in art, which we see in this space. I don't know how, you know, it will obviously date itself or feel of its time, but I also want it to feel like the message is timeless. It can reach anybody anytime. I used coffee before I started animating. It's been a material that I've used before. It's a great way to stain paper, essentially. And I really like the qualities of it. And based on the different kind of like thickness of the coffee, you can get different, you know, kind of like different edges crystallized and things like that. It's just a tool I've always used. And then, yeah, when I started animating these, there's a whole story of me kind of like going from painting to working on paper, working as quickly as I could, making it dry as fast as possible so I could rework it again and scan it. So that's how I landed on kind of whiteout and ink for the most part. It was fast. And then coffee is just something I had around. And coffee, I've learned just kind of accidentally, works interestingly with whiteout, where it like kind of absorbs into it in a cool way. And so with coffee and different staining, when I'm making these pieces, I can sort of like dim the whiteout a bit and then work back on top of the image with more whiteout. And it's sort of a natural way to let like previous marks embed themselves into the drawing so new marks can emerge on top and not just have the whole thing be so white all the time. Really like using kind of the bright white to always like kind of pop up in the frame, especially in brain lapse. And you'll see here, I'm also using collage. You might be able to notice here that I used a lot of pictures from a wood sample book. So they're like cut out pictures of wood grain. I'm also using gold and silver foil, and I'm using masking tape. So for me, these are all just like pretty straight ahead materials that I had lying around. And I really like the tonality of this piece, where it's kind of like black and white and browns and gold tones, and that it's dealing with collage. So like I mentioned with Paper Trail, this idea, you can see taping laid down here at the beginning and some images of kind of wood grain or some gold. In this piece, I was like sort of literally like drawing a leaf on a piece of paper and then moving it around. And when that head explodes and the head sort of moves around halfway through this piece, that's me literally shifting pieces of collage paper around. I really like that idea of, or the quality of the paper itself, the image itself sort of like crumbling and re-emerging, almost like this is sort of like an old wall or like a fresco on a wall that's like kind of like chipping to reveal earlier paintings underneath. And yeah, the story about it being listed for a long time, I mean, that's kind of been my experience in the space, to be honest with you. Like, I think these pieces are valuable and I list them for quite a bit. And they take as long as they need to sell, and that's fine. But I'm always happy to talk to collectors and negotiate and see where they're at. But yeah, again, like a piece like this took a really long time. And I think like it's not only just like this film, but it's a collection of all these unique still images. And yeah, I see this piece. If you see again, like I start with a landscape, I build on top of it. This one has a lot of Japanese influence, kind of more isometric kind of space design, and thinking about like screens or looking through different windows, through other windows, through different spaces, and then playing with this idea of a figure. We're sort of standing behind them. Not something in the beginning, at least. Not something I do in a lot of my pieces, but I like this idea that we were sort of, again, inhabiting their space. It seems like it's kind of like a self-portrait of me, and then we're playing with like sort of screens, reflections, windows. I do that a lot in my pieces, and I think of my pieces themselves as sort of like windows, or they are like when they're played obviously on screens in real life, like they are when they're played on a screen, they're sort of like this path, this entryway into another place. So I like playing with that motif here. But here also just playing with like what are different ways to keep building up an image without reworking it entirely. So hopefully you can just notice I'm like bringing things into the foreground, letting the previous images sort of kind of recede into the back, while it's still just a 2D image that is on one surface. Well, maybe I love it. I'm really not getting tired of playing with that. So I really like that quality of like, how can I just play with imagery on a two-dimensional surface over time and have it evolve in interesting ways? So there is some sort of like narrative implied with this, where the figure kind of comes in and comes out and is changing orientation and sort of dissolves into the landscape, and it just kind of restarts over and over again. Again, it's a version of the hero's journey in one way or another.
And it's so great how you make that 2D imagery almost have a 3D like feel to it as well. Really, really cool.
Yeah.
Uh,
I just want to say one quick thing. I love
yeah, go ahead.
the explanation of the materiality of this, which is, you know, very unique to this piece. But then also I think this kind of use of these like images of wood blocks reminds me of like, yeah, like early cubism as well, that brought in sort of this chair cane, the sort of Parisian chair caning, like the like wallpaper that had that motif. And that also in my mind brings back to this idea of like different planes and windows, which is obviously a very kind of cubist thing to do. So I don't think you're necessarily directly referencing that, but that's kind of what I'm seeing here as well.
I mean, that kind of was. That's so spot on. A lot of your references. It's like Picasso is such a trite like answer now when people ask about influences, but Picasso was legitimately like a genius in a lot of different periods of his work. Just the creative exploration really excites me, and yeah, a lot of his early collage work is groundbreaking. It's so shocking when you're studying art history. Like, no one really like thought about using collage. Generally, it's a very kind of modern way of thinking, and only makes sense in a modern context. And then using found patterns and using like the actual wicker of a wicker chair in a painting of a still life with a wicker chair in it. Like that sort of meta play between material and representation is actually super profound.
Yeah,
and things are still playing with.
And like modern and extremely new at that time too. Yeah.
Yeah, it still gets me off where it's like this is a representation of wood. It's depicting wood in the piece, and I'm playing with that, depicting real wood. What is real? What's fake? What is an illusion? Yeah. I'd say yes and no. Like I'm not like obviously when people think of self-portrait traditionally, it's like you're trying to represent the way you look. I mean, I would say self-portrait more in like the abstract sense, but this is stream of conscious, right? It's like frame by frame, and like the figure. To me, it's like me, but it's bigger than that. It's like what I was trying to say. It's the hero. It's sort of like all of us. It's the protagonist, but the protagonist generally tends to be me, or coming from my perspective. This piece is pretty wild. I would say more than like the last piece we just looked at. This one's a lot more inspired by like underground comics and like R. Crumb, and more sort of like cartoon language. Philip Guston is also one of these like painters that just like. I can talk about it for a long time, but his work just really speaks to me. He does a lot of also like close cropped, kind of these personal portraits that are sort of surreal and sort of like self-deprecating, and I really vibe with that. So when I see this piece, to me, it's like this is me, putting my heart out there in a lot of ways, like my anxiety and depression and confusion, but also just like for me, it's bodily, like thinking about my body and the weirdness of what it feels like to be inhabiting a human body, and sort of this push and pull between like, I don't know, the head's exploding a lot. There's a lot of, if you listen to it, I think it's called the deep end. I feel like it's very, so talking about symbols, like this is kind of being in the muck, like being in the deep end, being in the whale of the belly of the whale. Like this is me trudging through the mud, like trying to like get to the guru on the other side or something like that. There's pain to it. But there's also like, it's like all my work that I'm saying, like there's also like a lot of spiritual kind of uplifting imagery matching back with this sort of like, just figure who's like, being super introspective and sort of examining themselves. And again, trying to play with a lot of different imagery. And like clearly I'm looking at it now, like Egyptian kind of pyramids, sort of the airplanes. I'm thinking about kind of like modernism in general, sort of like times of upheaval and movement and shift and ways and shifting worlds. So again, I never want to place it, but there's a lot of mythology about like sort of a river or an underworld that you have to go through to get to some other thing, and it's mucky and you're challenged and you're tested to get to the other side, and there's like journeymen along the way, or like things that block you and test you. To me, a lot of this piece is about that.
There's a feeling of, I feel like there's like the personal kind of abject, like the muck, but then there's also this kind of like hero's journey again that comes up so often here. I also pinned a tweet at the top for more information about this work and more information about Jake on the AOTM website if anyone is interested.
Yeah, I should mention this piece is for sale. It's listed with AOTM. And it's been listed for a while, and I'm waiting for the right special collector to come along for this piece. This piece, I could go more into it. It's actually extremely important just in my professional career, because for whatever reason, it's been curated a lot. and got a lot of attention online when it came out, and really struck a chord with people, and this is a whole nother element of my career again, mainly before kind of Web3, but like my work's been screened at festivals and concerts a lot. And musicians really seem to vibe with this work for whatever reason. So maybe there's like a certain rhythm to it or quality to it. But this, to me, is like almost quintessential like piece for me. And I feel like it's really pure and raw. And it's something that's hard for me to recapture. As like I was saying, currently, I'm really in a mode of like, especially since I did the square loops, of really fine pen and ink work, super detailed and kind of realistic's the wrong word, but like highly rendered. And I think there's just something really special about these really emotive, more like puking my guts out kind of pieces. And this piece is really that. It's like really intense, and it's a piece that I cherish a lot. I really like it. All right, last piece over on the other side, raw data, similar, where it's also all the pieces actually in these three bigger pieces use coffee too, which lends itself to that sort of like splotchy, more kind of earthy quality maybe. Raw data was my first one-of-one that I ever minted, and for me, the reason I chose it is I think it's most directly in dialogue with like digital technology, and yeah, it's a lone figure, sort of like at a computer, in the computer, becoming one with the computer, very inspired by the experience of being in the internet age and online spaces and having a relationship with a computer as a person. Talking about influences, specifically, I remember when I was making this, I was really into, well, first of all, it's a reference we haven't brought up before, but like German Expressionism in general. I've mentioned woodblock printing a bunch, but like just German Expressionism in general is a big influence. Because I am an expressionist, and I'm really I'm Jewish also, and there's a lot of cultural kind of history there for me.
Yeah, I've seen like Blue Rider, all of that jazz.
Yeah, and just like, to be frank, like a lot of like just like the extremely expressive, sort of painful 20th century art that came out of the Jewish community. I wanted to bring that into this sort of like, this portrait. I don't know if I went more depth, but samurai specifically was really a big influence when I was making this piece. With all the images, the crowns and the things adornments coming out of the head. But I was like samurai armor and like just thinking about armor in general, or I guess like art that's made to be worn, an extension of the human body. And thinking of like cell phones and computers as extensions of our body. I was sort of making a lot of parallels at the time. So it's sort of like, what would like a digital warrior, like how'd you depict that? And sort of this figure with like plugs coming in and out of its body, like being interconnected with the technology, having these adornments that represent their cybernetic power or whatever. That was kind of top of mind for me when I was making this piece. And yeah, to me, it's like what a degen is, or like anyone who's like highly engaged with the digital space or has lost themselves in that world. And to me, that digital space, like we were saying before, relates itself to sort of like the more traditional idea of like a psychedelic, or it's an out of body sort of realm that we're all familiar with, or sort of this metaverse essentially. Yo, thank you guys so much for going along with me. This was amazing. Thank you both for the fantastic questions and insights. Got to thank AOTM for building this gallery for me and everything they've done. So again, my link in my bio goes to my AOTM profile, where you can see all these pieces in a more traditional sort of gallery format on our website, and actually see the provenance of where they're minted and everything like that, and see the piece, the D-pen that's still listed. And if anybody is interested, please don't hesitate to reach out to AOTM or myself. And I'd say we talked about a lot of my editions today too. So that link in my bio goes to those editions, and a lot of them have listings on secondary that you might be interested in if you're looking at the work to purchase. But even if you're not, just like a way to see the work and have another reference of it. It's very cool to have this virtual gallery space to do a tour like this. To see all you people who are in the space right now, I just really want to thank you. So many friends who came through, and it really means a lot to me. And yeah, I love this space. I love all of you. Even when I'm not in spaces, I'm here on the timeline, and I look forward to seeing what everyone's up to.
Thank you so much, Tony and oncyber, for allowing us to co-host, speak, whatever, and so generous of you to give us so much of your time. And I think we miss in the virtual space sometimes really spending time together with artwork. And this has just been an absolute joy and a pleasure. And thank you again to the AOTM team for putting this amazing gallery together. Pablo, Giga, Casey, and I see some of our artists here as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Appreciate you.